Hey there, it's that time of year again when you're with a group of friends and someone pulls out their phone and says to another friend, yo, check out how many points I scored this week on my fantasy league. And you're thinking to yourself, oh my gosh, not another conversation about sports. The next conversation is about players, statistics, when you drafted players, etc. and you are just very confused. Welcome to YaySports. We're all about creating better connections here, and so today we're going to be talking about fantasy football and how you can better connect your friends who love this game. Now you need to know a little bit about how fantasy football works, but I'm not going to go too in depth, so this is going to be more of a 30,000 foot overview with questions that you can ask your friends. The two most important things that you need to know are how's a team constructed and how do you score points. Here we go. Fantasy football is a virtual game based on real players and real statistics. The goal of the game is to build the best team possible and score more points than everyone else in your league. So the cool thing is that you can choose players from many different teams. So if you like one player from here, you can choose him. If you like another player from this team, you can choose him. So people don't choose players from the same teams typically. So the makeup of a fantasy team is usually players from many different types of teams. Draft day is by far the most important day of the fantasy season. And the reason for this is because that is when the best players are drafted. Once a player is chosen, that player is off the table and no one else can claim that player. For that person who chose that player, all of that player's fantasy points contributes to that owner's point total in the future. The draft can take anywhere between 45 minutes to an hour on average. The important thing here is that people do research before they enter the draft so they know who to draft and when to draft them. So you could ask somebody, how much research did you do before the draft? Or have you ever won this league before? So the draft is over and someone has their team. How does a team score points? The answer is by a player's actual in-game production. So let's say a quarterback throws a touchdown in real life. That is translated to a certain number of fantasy points that player scored. Whichever owner picked that player scored that many points. Same thing for running backs. They score points differently. For example, if a running back runs a certain number of yards, that translates to a certain number of fantasy points. So whoever chose that running back in fantasy scored that many fantasy points. The important thing here is that each week people will play different people within their league. And so whoever scores the most points, so all their fantasy players that they drafted, all their points added up, whoever scores more points wins that week. That's it. That's how simple fantasy is. You choose players and whatever points that player scores goes to your point totals. And there are playoffs and more complicated fantasy formats, but we're not going to get into that. I just gave you the basics. Here are some other questions that you could ask. Which group of friends do you have a league with? I don't personally play fantasy, but how do you think your team is going to do this season? Or which player of yours did the best for you this past week? For me, I've been playing fantasy for about 7 years, and it's a great way for me to connect with my friends who I don't get to see very often since we have various group chats and sometimes we video call. So that's what you need to know about fantasy football. I hope it was helpful. If you liked this video, please drop a like. And if you want to see more sports related content, please subscribe to my channel. Go forth and be knowledgeable about sports. Thanks for tuning in. Bye.